It is reported that President Cyril Ramaphosa might be visiting Russia soon to persuade President Vladimir Putin not to physically join the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. The report suggests Ramaphosa will persuade President Putin to attend at the meeting virtually. South Africa is under pressure to detain Putin should he set foot in Johannesburg. The ICC wants him arrested for Russia's aggression of Ukraine. Joining us is Stephen Gruzd, head of the African Governance and Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Stephen, I appreciate your time this afternoon. I certainly would not want to be in the shoes of President Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you make of this suggested trip to Russia to try and persuade President Putin not to come to the BRICS Summit?
So, thank you. I think President Putin has provided a huge dilemma for South Africa. As you said in your intro, because he's been indicted by the International Criminal Court, we would be obliged to arrest him. So I think all along South Africa has probably said, you're invited, but we would prefer it if you didn't come. President Ramaphosa is going to Europe, to Russia and to Ukraine, along with 6 other African heads of state. It's supposed to be next week. And amongst other things, I'm sure he will mention to President Putin that it would help us out a lot if he didn't attend in person. But, you know, there's a lot of prestige attached to the BRICS Summit. I don't think South Africa would want it ruined. But on the other hand, we also have legal obligations under the International Criminal Court that we're a member of, and its legislation has been domesticated in South Africa. So according to international law and domestic law, we would be obliged to arrest President Putin if he came. Whether we would do that is another question.
Well, we've had this situation before with Omar al-Bashir a few years ago. He came to South Africa and wasn't arrested. So technically it's nothing new. That in the one part. And in the second part, is President Cyril Ramaphosa likely to say to Vladimir Putin, Mr. President, please don't come to South Africa? Or is it a case of we're faced with a quandary? What would you suggest?
Well, firstly, to answer the second question first, I don't think South Africa will dictate to Russia. Russia is a much bigger country with nuclear weapons, and I think we heard the minister in the presidency say a couple of days ago, we don't want to go to war with Russia for arresting their president. So I don't think it'll be an order. I think it might well be a conversation to try and find ways of saving face and saving the summit and not embarrassing President Putin. I mean, I've also heard that Xi Jinping from China has said that if Putin doesn't come, he's not going to come. So there's also been rumors of having to move or maybe moving the summit to either Mozambique or to China, but we don't have clarity on that. I mean, going to your first question about Omar al-Bashir, yes, indeed, this did happen in 2015. He attended an African Union summit in Johannesburg, and the country was also obliged to arrest him, as you say. And while he was in the country, there were urgent court proceedings which confirmed that South Africa should arrest him. And he was assisted to leave the country through the Waterkloof Air Base. And there weren't really very many consequences for South Africa. There was a lot of criticism in the media. There was a criticism on social media. Academics wrote papers about it. The ICC complained. But really, there weren't really far-reaching consequences from 2015. I think this time it's a little different. There's a huge amount of international attention on this. It has been building up for months because the indictment came out in March and President Putin was invited in February, and there was a 6-month period before he would actually set foot in South Africa. But we don't know that he would actually have come. He hasn't confirmed that he's coming. His office has been a little evasive, and so it's all very ambiguous. So probably for President Ramaphosa's peace of mind, it will be good for him to be in Moscow or wherever he's meeting President Putin in Russia to air our position and see what's possible.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa is faced with a delicate balancing act, if you will. He was not invited to the G7 summit, first time that this has happened. Are these the signals or signs, if you will, that obviously held in Asia, but that the West is sending, or the signals that they're sending about the potential ramifications if he does come to South Africa and is then not arrested?
Yeah, the West is, I think, very unhappy with South Africa's positions that it's taken, even though we've said that we are non-aligned. we do seem to be leaning quite heavily on Russia's side. And indeed, the non-invitation to the G7 summit in Japan could be interpreted as a snub for South Africa. That's not how DIRCO played it. They said they're more than happy for the African Union chairman from the Comores to go there, and that's that. But yeah, I mean, South Africa does risk secondary sanctions. The Reserve Bank has come up with a statement, as have Standard Bank and Nedbank, have said that we are in dangerous waters. I mean, our trade with Europe and the US is about 30% of our trade volume, and our trade with Russia is less than 1%. So who is the more important trading partner, and is it worth risking those relationships because of ideological affinity or nostalgia for the former Soviet Union?
Stephen, you raise an issue that has baffled many, and I think been the source of much debate. Why does Russia seem to have so much power or so much influence on African states, and yet has very, very little to contribute economically, certainly for the vast number of them?
Yes, I mean, I think there is a conundrum there. Russia really invests in niche markets, including the nuclear market, the weapons sales. It's involved in some mining and extraction of minerals. But really the trade is rather negligible compared to other players like Europe, the US, or China. What Russia does offer is political support. Its narrative of a multipolar world has resonance in Africa. It's standing up to the West and standing up to the United States, and not being cowed by them, I think, appeals to many leaders. And there is still historical baggage. South Africa and many of the countries in Southern Africa went through freedom struggles, and the USSR was right behind them with money, with training, with diplomatic support. And so those bonds formed decades ago, I think, still hold strong, even though there may be a different generation of leadership coming in. Those historical ties are important, and they see Russia as a counterbalance to a very dominant United States, or one that's having its dominance questioned by China. But Russia is seen as a champion of the developing world and a country that's prepared to stand up to the West.
So let's rewind a little bit to one of the issues that you talked about, and that's the alternative hosts for the BRICS, which is scheduled to take place in this country in a few months. And you've suggested China, and obviously the West will not have too much to say or any influence on that. But you've also mentioned Mozambique. How is Mozambique any different to South Africa? Or certainly the implications of them hosting the BRICS Summit?
Yeah, I mean, that rumor came up and went down quite quickly. I mean, the fact is that Mozambique is not a member of the International Criminal Court and therefore would not be obliged to arrest President Putin. China, likewise, is not a member of the court. Neither is Russia. And so if it moved to China, the ICC would have no jurisdiction. So that's the argument for Mozambique, and maybe because it's close by to South Africa.
So let's talk about the 6 heads of state plus President Cyril Ramaphosa, which makes 7, that are going to be in conversation with President Putin and obviously President Vladimir Zelensky, trying to stall the war, if you will, or reach some agreement to ending the war. What is it that they're likely to take to either conversation with the two presidents?
Yeah, so my information is that they'll go to Kiev first, probably by train from Poland. And then they will go back to Poland and then on to Russia. I think there are 3 things that they're going to focus on. The one is prisoner exchanges, because each side is holding prisoners of war. The second is fertilizer, which is an important issue for Russia. It's a massive supplier of fertilizer around the world. And the third is, of course, grain. And we've already had one of maybe the few bright spots in this war, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which has allowed at least some shipments of cereals and grains from that part of the world through the Black Sea. So that's the information that I've seen about what they're going to offer. I mean, on the one hand, African countries know all about conflict and all about mediation, and we have a lot of experience. There are leaders from all different parts of the continent, from Egypt, from Cote d'Ivoire, from Zambia, from South Africa, and the Comores as well. And we offer that experience. But we also, I think it might be confusing and difficult with 7 heads of state engaging at the same time. And, do we have the resources and the sticking power to see this through?
Stephen Gruzd, Head of African Governance and Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Appreciate your time this afternoon.